Humanity had spent centuries gazing at the stars, imagining what life beyond Earth might be like. With each new technological breakthrough, the dream of encountering alien life became a bit more possible. But when first contact finally came, it wasn't the peaceful meeting humanity had hoped for, it was an invasion. The Venari, an ancient and war-hardened species, arrived in Earth's skies, their fleet blotting out the sun. Their ships were massive, their technology far beyond anything humanity could comprehend. The Venari's arrival was not marked by communication, but by destruction. Without warning, they unleashed a terrifying barrage of energy weapons upon Earth's major cities. The power of their attacks seemed almost limitless. Buildings crumbled, monuments fell, and entire populations were wiped out in a matter of hours. The Venari had come not to explore, but to conquer, to enslave a planet they saw as weak and ripe for domination. At first, Earth's leaders were paralyzed by the sheer scale of the assault. Their armies, equipped with the best weapons Earth had ever known, were no match for the Venari's advanced war machines. Nations were thrown into chaos as military forces scrambled to defend their cities, but it was clear, humanity was outmatched. The Venari moved with cold precision, their fleet systematically destroying any resistance. They struck with no mercy, razing cities and taking entire regions by force. In those early days, fear gripped the hearts of every human alive. It seemed as though Earth's fate had been sealed, that the dream of peace and exploration was nothing more than a fantasy. The Venari's superiority was undeniable, their strategy flawless, and their cruelty boundless. Yet, amid the despair, something incredible began to stir within humanity. Rather than submit, Earth's leaders made a bold decision. They would not surrender. There was no other choice. The human race had come too far to simply bow before an invader. A resistance began to form. Small, scattered groups of soldiers, scientists, and civilians began organizing in secret, creating underground networks of communication. Though outgunned and outmatched, they refused to give up. They knew they couldn't win by using the same tactics as the Venari. Humanity's strength had always been its adaptability, its creativity, its sheer determination to survive against impossible odds. The Venari had underestimated one key factor, the human spirit. The Venari, confident in their superiority, gave little thought to the idea that a species as primitive as humanity could pose a real threat. They assumed that the planet would fall into chaos, that the people would crumble under the weight of their assault. The human response, however, was nothing short of remarkable. As the Venari's weapons continued to rain down, humanity did not break. Instead, they began to innovate. In hidden labs, engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to create weapons and technologies that could challenge the Venari's dominance. They had little time, but what they lacked in resources, they made up for with ingenuity. Soon, whispers began circulating about a new weapon, a device unlike anything the Venari had ever seen. It was small, almost unassuming at first glance, but its potential was immense. It was humanity's answer to the Venari's overwhelming force, and the Resistance's first successful strike with it sent shockwaves through the invaders. For the first time since their arrival, the Venari were unsure. However, their initial underestimation of humanity's resilience was not just about weapons. The Venari were accustomed to facing foes that submitted, who lacked the will to push back. They had never encountered a species like Earth's. While their ships and weapons were powerful, the Venari had no understanding of the fierce determination that coursed through humanity. Every human left standing after the Venari's first assault refused to be silenced. It wasn't just the fight that mattered, it was the will to fight, to keep going no matter the odds. In the early days, as the death toll mounted and cities were reduced to rubble, some believed humanity had no future, that the fight was already over before it even truly began. But they were wrong. The Venari had thought that a few blows to Earth would send the planet into disarray, but instead, the opposite occurred. Humanity's darkest hour became its greatest strength. The Venari, though advanced, could not predict the incredible power of a species backed into a corner. The world watched in fear as the Venari pressed their advantage, but behind the scenes, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. The human race, though outmatched in numbers and technology, had something far more valuable: their refusal to give in. The Venari had thought they were invincible, that no one could stand in their way. But what they didn't account for was that humanity had been underestimating itself long before they ever came to Earth. And now the Venari were about to learn a lesson they would never forget: the true power of humanity's will to survive. As the days passed, the Venari continued their ruthless campaign, leaving Earth's cities in ruins and striking terror into the hearts of its people. Their ships hovered over the planet, casting dark shadows over the broken landscapes, while their advanced weaponry decimated entire regions with chilling ease. It seemed as though victory was inevitable. The Venari, who had long ruled over a vast swath of the galaxy, grew more and more confident in their success. Their commanders watched as Earth's governments scrambled to respond, their armies outclassed by the sheer power of the Venari war machines. The aliens were certain that humanity was no match for them, a young species barely out of its infancy in space exploration. They saw humans as a primitive race, unworthy of being called equals, and believed that the final subjugation of Earth was simply a matter of time. The humans, with their fragile bodies and limited resources, could not hope to resist their superior strength. The Venari, like many conquerors before them, underestimated something fundamental about humanity: its ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. The destruction continued as weeks turned into months, and yet, Earth's leaders refused to give up. Their military forces were no match for the Venari, but humanity was not known for its strength alone. It was known for its adaptability, for its ability to think and innovate when cornered. Earth's leaders, realizing that conventional tactics would lead only to further destruction, began to secretly shift their approach. They understood that they could not fight the Venari on their terms, with their advanced weaponry and seasoned combat strategies. Instead, they needed to think differently, to find ways to turn the tide without relying on brute force. While the Venari felt their victory was inevitable, the human race began working in the shadows, determined to find a way to survive and fight back. In underground facilities, hidden from the Venari's all-seeing eyes, scientists, engineers, and military strategists began to work together in a desperate attempt to develop something that could turn the tide. Earth's finest minds, those who had once built rockets and satellites, now turned their attention to the most pressing problem humanity had ever faced: how to stop an unstoppable enemy. They knew they couldn't win by matching the Venari ship for ship, weapon for weapon. The Venari's technology was light years ahead of anything humanity had, but Earth had something the aliens had overlooked: sheer determination and creativity. Humanity had always been at its best when forced to find new ways to solve problems, to look at things from an angle no one else considered. The team of scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, often without sleep, on a solution. They scoured ancient archives and deep space research for clues. Old and forgotten theories about energy sources, gravity manipulation, and quantum mechanics became the basis of their efforts. It was during one of these late-night brainstorming sessions that they discovered something incredible, something that had been hiding in plain sight. They realized that the very nature of the Venari's power could be turned against them. The aliens' advanced technology, so seemingly impenetrable, had one glaring weakness. It was built on principles humanity had just begun to understand. If they could somehow tap into this weakness, they might have a chance. The solution was simple yet brilliant. It would require new technology that could disrupt the Venari's energy systems, their shields, and their weapons. Earth's engineers began developing an experimental device that could interfere with the alien technology by using a completely different kind of energy. The technology itself was highly experimental, but it was their only hope. While the Venari rested on their laurels, certain of their triumph, humanity's hidden networks continued to work. The Venari, in their arrogance, never suspected that such efforts were underway. They believed they had broken the human spirit, that the rest of Earth's forces were too weak, too fractured to pose any real threat. But deep beneath the surface, humanity was quietly preparing for the day they would strike back. As the work progressed, the pressure began to mount. There was no room for failure. The clock was ticking, and the Venari were getting closer to their ultimate goal. Yet, in the darkest corners of Earth, hope began to grow. The humans had not surrendered. They had not given up. Instead, they were preparing to fight back with something far more powerful than weapons: their ingenuity. The scientists and engineers worked day and night, using every resource they could find, building something that could change everything. It was risky, untested, and could fail in an instant, but it was their only option. The Venari continued to believe they had already won, and in their arrogance, they gave humanity the time they needed to develop their surprise. The stage was set, and soon, humanity would make its move. What the Venari didn't know was that, while they celebrated their victory, the humans were about to show them the true meaning of adaptation, and the price of underestimating the resilience of a species that refused to surrender. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, where the Venari's reach had yet to touch, humanity's last hope was born. In a hidden underground facility, a breakthrough occurred that would change everything. The discovery was entirely unexpected. While searching for new technologies to counter the Venari's dominance, a team of scientists stumbled upon something ancient, an artifact buried deep within a long-forgotten underground chamber. The object, covered in layers of dust and stone, was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't alien in nature, nor was it of any known origin. In fact, it seemed to predate even human civilization, and yet it felt strangely familiar. It was a relic of a civilization lost to time, one whose existence had never been recorded in any history books, a mystery buried for millennia. This artifact was no ordinary object. It hummed with a strange energy that defied all understanding. The energy emanating from it was not bound by the laws of physics as humanity knew them. It was an unknown power, one that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The discovery immediately sent shockwaves through the ranks of Earth's scientists and engineers. They had found something that could potentially turn the tide against the Venari. The energy source, once carefully analyzed, revealed extraordinary potential. It was pure, raw, and capable of interacting with energy fields in ways that humanity had never imagined. After months of research, it became clear that this energy could be harnessed, but how? The question gnawed at the minds of the brightest minds on Earth. After much trial and error, they created a device that could channel this newfound power. They called it the Star-Forged weapon. The Star-Forged weapon was unlike any other tool of war. It wasn't a massive, cumbersome machine, but a small, portable device, sleek and deceptively simple. It could fit into the hands of a single soldier, yet its power was boundless. The design itself was based on the energy from the artifact, a perfect fusion of ancient technology and human ingenuity. Despite its small size, the Starforged weapon could neutralize the Venari's advanced technology. It was capable of disrupting their shields, disabling their weapons, and rendering their most powerful ships useless. What made it even more remarkable was that, for all its power, it did not require vast amounts of resources or complex infrastructure to operate. It was a solution that fit the needs of a world in crisis, a weapon built for survival, not dominance. With the Starforged weapon now ready for use, the human resistance launched its first test strike in the shadows. The Venari, still convinced of their superiority, had no idea what was coming. The first strike was calculated, cautious. No one knew exactly what the weapon would do. But the results were immediate, and they were beyond anyone's expectations. The human resistance had identified a lone Venari destroyer, one of the largest ships in their fleet, patrolling a remote sector of Earth's atmosphere. It was an ideal target, isolated and unaware of the weapon that was about to be used against it. The strike was swift. A single human soldier, armed with the Starforged device, launched a precise attack on the destroyer's energy core. The moment the weapon fired, the Venari ship seemed to shudder, its massive hull trembling as if it was struck by an invisible force. The ship's shields flickered out, and its weapon systems powered down in an instant. Within moments, the destroyer was disabled, its systems completely fried, leaving the Venari crew helpless. The Venari had never encountered anything like it. The entire fleet had been designed to withstand the most advanced weaponry the universe had to offer, yet this small, seemingly insignificant weapon had rendered one of their most powerful ships useless in the blink of an eye. The effects were immediate and profound. The Venari fleet, once certain of their victory, began to question their superiority. Word spread through their ranks that Earth had developed something that could counter their technology, something they could not understand or fight against. The Venari, masters of destruction and conquest, had been brought to their knees by a device crafted by a species they had once considered beneath them. In the following days, the Venari's confidence faltered. Rumors of more Starforged strikes began circulating throughout their fleet, and their commanders realized that their once unshakable position was now vulnerable. Meanwhile, the human resistance, emboldened by their first success, began to build momentum. They realized they no longer had to accept defeat. They could now strike back. The Starforged weapon, while still experimental, had proven its potential. As the resistance expanded, so too did their arsenal. What started as a hidden hope in the shadows was now a force that could challenge the Venari's once unstoppable might. The tide was beginning to shift, and the Venari were finally starting to understand the truth. They had underestimated humanity in ways they would never be able to undo. The war had just taken a terrifying turn for them, and there was no turning back. The human race, armed with the power of the Starforged weapon, was no longer just defending their world. They were preparing to take the fight to the stars. The Venari were not accustomed to defeat. They had conquered countless worlds across the galaxy, faced armies far larger and more powerful than the humans could ever hope to field, and emerged victorious every single time. But when the humans unleashed the Starforged weapon, something unexpected happened. A small, seemingly insignificant species had managed to strike at the heart of their empire, something the Venari had never considered possible. It was unthinkable. How could a race that had only recently discovered space travel and was still in its infancy compared to the advanced civilizations the Venari had crushed stand up to them in such a way? The Venari had assumed that their technological supremacy was unquestionable, that no force in the galaxy could challenge their power. But humanity had just done the unthinkable, and now they were starting to pay the price for their arrogance. The first shock came when the Venari fleet, once invincible, began to suffer from a series of sudden, devastating strikes. The Starforged weapon, small and portable as it was, had proven to be a game-changer. What began as a single successful attack had quickly evolved into a series of lightning-fast assaults. Resistance fighters, armed with the newly developed technology, began taking down Venari warships across the planet. What had seemed like a fleeting hope now became a formidable force, and with each successful strike, the Venari's confidence began to falter. Their advanced weaponry and sophisticated tactics, which had been so effective against lesser species, were now rendered useless against an enemy that refused to break. The Venari commanders scrambled to find answers, but they were running out of time. The humans weren't just defending themselves anymore, they were striking back with a purpose. Cities that had been razed by the Venari's initial onslaught were now being rebuilt at an astonishing rate. What seemed like ruins were rapidly transformed into bustling hubs of resistance, where ordinary civilians worked alongside military forces to rebuild their homes and their lives. The human spirit, a force the Venari had never accounted for, proved to be as powerful as any weapon in their arsenal. Humanity didn't just fight to survive. They fought for something far more important, an unshakable belief in the future. They knew that this was their moment, that they were standing at the threshold of something far greater than simply defending their homes. They were fighting for the survival of their species, for the future of Earth, and for their place in the stars. That knowledge, that determination, fueled every attack, every battle and every victory. As the human forces gained ground, the Venari's strategy began to unravel. No longer able to rely on their overwhelming firepower, the alien invaders found themselves at a loss. Their massive warships, once seen as symbols of invincibility, were now falling one by one. The Venari fleet, once an unstoppable force, had been reduced to a shell of its former self, and the cracks were beginning to show. The Venari were not used to fighting a war of attrition, and they had never faced an enemy that could adapt as quickly as humanity had. The human soldiers, empowered by the knowledge that they were now on the offensive, fought with a tenacity that left the Venari commanders bewildered. For the first time in the war, the Venari found themselves on the defensive, retreating from battles they once thought they would win with ease. The battles themselves were intense, each one pushing the human forces to their limits. But every time the Venari thought they had dealt a fatal blow, the humans would strike back harder. The war had become a vicious cycle. The Venari would attack, and the humans would respond with an even more devastating counterattack. The Venari commanders watched in disbelief as their plans fell apart, their superiority slipping through their fingers. What had once been a war of absolute dominance had transformed into a brutal contest where every victory was hard won and every loss carried heavy consequences. The Venari were learning, but too late. Humanity was already a step ahead. The once mighty Venari fleet, now badly damaged and disorganized, struggled to maintain control. The shockwaves of each human victory reverberated throughout their ranks, weakening their resolve. As the war shifted in favor of the humans, the invaders began to realize that they had underestimated the sheer resilience and ingenuity of the human race. They had assumed that their advanced technology and superior combat strategies would be enough to crush Earth's defenses. But humanity had done what no one, not even the Venari, had believed possible. They had turned the tide of war. And as the human forces continued to press forward, fueled by their newfound hope and determination, the Venari knew that this fight was far from over. What they had once believed would be a quick conquest was now a war for their very survival. Humanity's counterattacks, fueled by the star-forged weapon and an unrelenting will to survive, were transforming the course of the war. The Venari had underestimated their enemy, and now they were learning the hard way that there was nothing more dangerous than a species fighting for its future. The reversal had begun, and the Venari were starting to realize just how costly their arrogance had been. As humanity's forces began to turn the tide of the war, the Venari's once unwavering confidence was shaken. The human resistance, empowered by the star-forged weapon and their unrelenting determination, had forced the alien invaders into a retreat. The Venari, cornered and desperate, realized they were facing an enemy far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. However, rather than surrender, the Venari did what they had done countless times in their brutal conquests across the galaxy. They unleashed a secret weapon, a last-ditch effort to break the will of their human foes. This time, the weapon wasn't a high-tech missile or a deadly laser. It was something far more insidious, something that preyed on humanity's most vulnerable weakness, disease. The Venari had developed a biological plague, a virus engineered specifically to decimate the human population. It was released in secret, spread across hidden areas of the Earth, and set loose without mercy. Its effects were swift. Cities were thrown into chaos as the plague began to spread. People fell ill with alarming speed, their bodies succumbing to the virus within days. The Venari, watching from their fleet, believed they had won. This new weapon, they thought, would be the end of humanity. They had underestimated one crucial thing, however, the human ability to adapt. As the plague spread, it quickly became clear that the Venari had miscalculated. Humanity's resilience, which the aliens had once dismissed as weakness, began to show itself in unexpected ways. Earth's scientists, who had already been working tirelessly to counter the Venari's technological advantage, shifted their focus to the new threat. The human immune system, unlike the Venari's highly controlled and predictable biology, was a marvel of adaptability. While the plague took hold, humanity began to fight back in a way the Venari never anticipated. Research teams sprang into action, collaborating across borders and disciplines, fueled by the urgency of the situation. Within a matter of days, they discovered that the virus could be countered. The human body, far more versatile than the Venari had realized, began to create antibodies that worked against the disease. Meanwhile, scientists developed a cure in record time, leveraging every bit of knowledge they had about viruses and human biology. What the Venari had seen as a weapon that would crush humanity's spirit became the catalyst for their greatest strength to emerge. The cure, once developed, was distributed rapidly across the globe. Humanity, as always, rose to the challenge. People worked together in ways that transcended borders, putting aside differences in the face of this new threat. Hospitals, already stretched thin from the ongoing war, became centers of resistance against the plague. Within weeks, the disease that had once seemed so unstoppable was under control. The Venari, watching from the skies, were horrified. Their biological weapon had failed. Humans had adapted faster than they could have ever imagined. The plague that was meant to be humanity's undoing was now a testament to their strength and ingenuity. The Venari, who had long thought of humanity as weak and fragile, were now forced to confront a painful truth. The very thing they had counted on to break the human spirit had only proven how strong that spirit truly was. The plague had not only been defeated, but had brought the human race closer together. The Venari commanders, enraged by their failure, knew they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt and evolve. While the Venari relied on technology and sheer force, humanity had always survived by their ability to think, to innovate, and to rise above their challenges. As the plague was eradicated, the human resistance grew stronger. The Venari, reeling from their failed biological attack, now faced a world that was more united, more determined, and more prepared than ever. Their attempts to break humanity's will had only solidified it. Humanity's success against the plagues sparked a renewed vigor in their fight for survival. As Earth's forces rallied, the Venari's grip on the planet tightened, their superiority slipping away with every passing day. The Venari had no idea that in their attempt to destroy humanity, they had only empowered them further. And as humanity continued to fight back, the Venari began to realize that there was no force in the galaxy more dangerous than a species that could adapt, overcome, and thrive, even in the face of their darkest threats. The final confrontation was upon them. Humanity had endured years of suffering, from the first wave of the Venari invasion to the biological plague that had threatened to wipe them out. But now, with the Venari weakened and their forces scattered, humanity's resolve had never been stronger. The time had come for the last assault, an all-out strike to push the alien invaders from Earth's orbit and into the history books. Earth's newly formed fleets, now fully equipped with the devastating Starforge weapons, were prepared to face the remnants of the Venari forces in one final showdown. The battle would take place in the vast expanse of space, just beyond the atmosphere of their home planet, where humanity had already proven its resourcefulness and courage. But this time, it wasn't just survival at stake. It was the future of the human race and their rightful place on the galactic stage. The Venari, though battered and beaten, was still a formidable force. Their once proud fleet, though reduced in number, still carried immense firepower. Their ships gleamed with alien technology, their weapons capable of decimating entire fleets with a single strike. Yet, for all their might, the Venari had failed to account for the most dangerous weapon of all, the sheer willpower and determination of the human spirit. This battle was not just about technology or firepower, it was about something far more powerful, the unyielding drive to survive and to prove that humanity had a place among the stars. The first shots were fired in the darkness of space, the sharp flash of energy weapons cutting through the void. Humanity's ships, powered by the energy from the Starforged weapons, clashed with the Venari's remaining warships in a violent display of light and sound. It was chaos. The Venari, caught off guard by the relentless assault, tried to regroup, but they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. Their ships, once impervious to human attacks, now faltered under the onslaught of humanity's new weaponry. With every strike, the Venari fleet lost another ship, another piece of their once mighty armada. Each ship that fell was a blow to the Venari's morale, and with every defeat, the human forces grew bolder, their confidence rising as they realized they could win. It was a fight unlike any other. Humanity, against all odds, had taken control of the battlefield. The Venari had underestimated them from the start, first with their technology, then with their resilience, and now with their military might. The Venari had expected to crush humanity easily, but what they didn't understand was that Earth's people were not like the civilizations they had conquered before. Humanity had an endless capacity to adapt, to innovate, and to fight back against all odds. And that was exactly what they were doing now. One by one, the Venari warships fell. Their shields, once unbreakable, were torn apart by the devastating energy blasts of the star-forged weapons. Their advanced technology, so long a symbol of their superiority, now seemed feeble in the face of humanity's determination. The Venari commanders, watching from their flagships, knew they were losing, but they could do nothing to stop the tide of destruction that was coming for them. Their forces were scattered, their leadership fractured, and their once imposing fleet was being picked apart piece by piece. With every Venari ship that fell, humanity's fleet grew more aggressive. The human forces had nothing left to lose. They were fighting not just for victory, but for the future of their world and the survival of their species. They knew this was the final chance to defeat the Venari once and for all, and they were not going to let it slip away. The Venari had no idea what was coming. As their forces dwindled, they scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Humanity had already crossed the point of no return, and now they were on the verge of total victory. The final moments of the battle were chaos, ships colliding, explosions lighting up the blackness of space, and the Venari desperately trying to hold on to whatever was left of their once proud fleet. But there was no turning back now. Humanity's forces, emboldened by the victories they had won, pressed forward with unrelenting force. The Venari, now desperate, made one last attempt to launch a counteroffensive, but it was futile. Their remaining ships were too few, and their morale had crumbled. With a final devastating blow, the last of the Venari warships was destroyed, and the battle was over. The Venari had been defeated. Humanity stood victorious. The battle for Earth was won, but more than that, humanity had proven something far more significant. They had proven that, against all odds, they could rise up and defend their world. The Venari, who had once believed that Earth was an easy conquest, now knew the truth. Humanity was not to be underestimated. This final showdown was not just a victory over an alien invader. It was a statement to the galaxy. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. In the final moments of the battle, the Venari flagship, once a towering symbol of their might and power, was reduced to nothing more than a fiery wreck in the void of space. It had been the heart of their command, a giant that had loomed over Earth for years, its weapons and technology seemingly unstoppable. But now it was destroyed, a casualty of humanity's relentless resolve. The coalition of human forces, despite their initial disadvantages, had worked together with unthinkable precision. The Venari flagship, once thought untouchable, had fallen before the ingenuity and sheer willpower of a species they had long considered insignificant. The soundless explosion of the ship's destruction sent shockwaves through the remnants of the Venari fleet, which now scrambled in a desperate retreat. For the first time since their arrival, the Venari were running, not because of strategic necessity, but because they were no longer capable of fighting. The mighty invaders were fleeing back into the black depths of space, and the Earth had won. Humanity stood victorious, though the victory came at a cost. The war had torn the planet apart, cities had been razed, and countless lives had been lost. But in the face of every tragedy, humanity had proven its strength, not through superior weapons or overwhelming numbers, but through its unyielding spirit. The Venari had assumed that their advanced technology and battle-hardened nature would crush Earth in a matter of weeks. They had underestimated the power of hope, unity, and an undying desire to survive. Earth had not only endured, it had fought back with everything it had, and in doing so, it had earned its place in the stars. The remnants of the Venari fleet, now broken and scattered, fled into deep space, their once proud empire shattered. They had been bested by a species they had once viewed as primitive, a species they had believed was no match for their superior technology. But humanity had shown them the truth. The Venari had come to Earth with the arrogance of conquerors, confident in their ability to subjugate the planet with ease. They had underestimated Earth's greatest weapon, its people. While the Venari were ruthless, they lacked the one thing that made humanity truly formidable: the ability to adapt, to learn, and to never give up. As the last remnants of the Venari ships vanished into the distant stars, humanity began to rebuild. The victory was not just one of tactics, but of spirit. The world had been united in a way it had never been before. Countries that had once bickered over borders and resources now stood together as one, bound by the shared knowledge that the survival of humanity depended on their collective strength. In the ruins of the old world, new foundations were laid, and humanity began to chart its path into the future. Earth had proven its resilience, and the universe was now watching. The stars, which had once seemed so distant and unreachable, were no longer a mystery. Humanity had not only survived the Venari invasion, they had made their mark on the galaxy. No longer would they be the helpless species, watching from the sidelines as more advanced civilizations dominated the cosmos. Humanity had stood up, and the entire universe now knew that Earth was not a planet to be trifled with. The lesson was clear. No matter the odds, no matter the challenges, humanity would always find a way to adapt, to rise, and to fight back. The Venari, in their retreat, had been humbled in a way they would never forget. They had come to Earth thinking they could impose their will, believing that their advanced technology would crush humanity without a second thought. But they had learned the hard way that humanity's true strength lay not in its weapons, but in its resilience. The Venari would never forget the day they faced Earth's greatest power, the will of a species that refused to be conquered. And as humanity looked to the stars, there was no doubt that their place in the galaxy had been secured. The future was theirs to shape, and they would not stop until they had claimed their rightful place among the stars. The victory over the Venari was not just a military triumph, it was the beginning of a new era for humanity. One where they would continue to fight, to adapt, and to conquer anything that stood in their way.